Welcome to the show, everybody. Michael with CoronavirusDiaries, and today I'm fortunate enough to be able to speak again with Linsey Williams, a non-commissioned officer in the Public Affairs Office of the Minnesota National Guards. Linsey, how are you?
I'm doing very well, Micah. How are you?
I'm doing great. The last time we spoke, you were in the process of buying a house. I think it was contingent. And before we started talking today or recording, you shared a little bit. The journey is interesting. Can you share a
Yeah.
little bit?
Yeah. So it seemed like such a great house, and then you get it inspected, and then, you have a professional going through it with a fine-tooth comb, and then you see a lot of nooks and crannies that you never saw before. So the folks who had started to flip this house, they basically didn't finish the job. It was very ad hoc. The electrical was mixed with old and new, and the whole HVAC system had a lot of issues, all kinds of stuff. So I was fortunate enough to be able to say, look, there's enough wrong with this that it's not worth negotiating. We're going to pull the plug. And I went back to a house I'd looked at before, and an offer had been put on the house. So it was kind of poop or get off the pot. So I went for it, and I pulled the trigger, and yeah, I won sort of a small bidding war. There was a few of us that put in offers on the house, and it was exciting. It's been, I don't know about how it is with a lot of your audience, but the market here in Minnesota has been crazy. When I started looking, there were quite a few houses, and a lot of them I didn't even get to go see because they were, listed and eaten up so quick. So
How long ago did you start looking?
I was mostly looking in the Richfield area.
How long ago? Are we talking a few months, or were you looking last fall?
Month. It was pretty quick turnaround. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Because before I was looking at properties elsewhere in the country, and I've since made decisions that I wouldn't do that because the pandemic has kind of changed everything.
So you've pivoted from looking outside of the state to, you still want a house, but you're based on certain the circumstances, you're gonna buy locally to Minnesota.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious, in the time that you've been looking, so VA home loan, correct?
Yes.
Is what you're using. So for any viewers, listeners that aren't familiar, the VA home loan is offered to veterans in order to get into a property with there's some perks to it, one of which is zero down payment. You have the option of a zero down payment, and then no, the property,
the primary mortgage insurance.
The PMI, right?
Yep.
So then there's no PMI on top of it. That's pretty much it though, right?
That's one of the good things. It guarantees that there's no penalty for, paying off early or anything like that. And yeah, it does have to be a primary residence. But
oh, that's right. You have to live in it. I guess the downside, maybe not necessarily a downside, it could really keep people out of a buy that may not necessarily be the best. But that is it's contingent on inspection. And so you had just had that inspection done. There was electrical, plumbing. Would the VA, did the inspection, would it have allowed for you to even use a VA home loan on that other property, or did it?
No, not in the condition that it was in. And what's interesting is with a VA home loan, so you get it appraised and inspected to a degree, but it's not like a regular home inspection. So it's almost kind of like going through two. So I had a professional that I paid come out and do a sweep of the house and, make some notes, but now there'll be a second appraiser coming through from the VA to say, look, based on X, Y, and Z, we will or won't fund this loan. And so that's just kind of the stage we're at right now. And then we'll adjust accordingly, take care of whatever we need to take care of.
I mean, all things considered, I know people that had been looking for a house for over a year, and this is obviously pre-pandemic, but it was about a year or so ago that they had been making every single offer that they'd made on a property was overbid on there, and there was people, there's people friends of mine that had sold their house, and it was selling for like 10 and 15,000 over their high asking price. So there was like a very heavy seller's market. Do you think it's still a seller's market, or how did it work out for you on your bidding?
Pretty good. I went, the house originally listed at a certain price, and then it dropped 12,000 after so long. It was on the market for a little over a month, maybe about 34, 35 days before they accepted my offer or put a deadline on an offer. And it seems like, though, especially like if we're just using Richfield as a microcosm, since that's what I've been looking at, it's been a popular area for a while, but depending on the updates that folks are doing to the home, because some people, they make it look great on the outside, but the inside's still, 15 years ago, or only, little things have been updated. And sometimes you'll see the exact opposite, where the whole interior is done, but outside it still looks like, 30 years ago or something like that. But they're all kind of getting around or above asking price, but it seems like things are starting to kind of even out and price out. But I mean, home sales as a whole, they haven't really slowed down.
Curious, the which route did you go for? Did you have more value in what the inside of the house was, or what the exterior, the curb appeal was?
Yeah, for me it was definitely about having the curb appeal's nice, but there were some things I knew I wanted. Like, I know that I'm pretty suburban. I've been living here in a city for a while, and there's a garage off of an alley, and I was like, I don't want that. And this house still kind of has the old world charm in the design of the house, but it's got its own driveway with its own garage and a fenced in yard, and the yard's pretty big. So open space like that was pretty important to me.
Nice.
Yeah.
Great. So you're waiting now on the second inspection?
Yep, the VA appraisal, and then based on that, we'll kind of move forward. But yeah,
So there was a little bidding war. The seller accepted your last bid. You had an initial inspection. Now this second inspection. Closing. What does closing look like? Is it like a 30-day type of turnaround?
yeah. So I'll hopefully close just at the tail end of May, maybe right after Labor Day. I'm sorry, Memorial Day, and then I gotta go somewhere and sign a whole bunch of papers and just sign my life to this new piece of property, which I'm excited about. But yeah, so between then and now, my agents talked to their agent, and they offered to do a home warranty because there are some, just to kind of keep me protected for a year in case anything goes out or anything.
It's like appliances and water heater.
Yeah,
kind of.
so that's nice. And then it sounds like I'll probably get a ping pong table out of the deal. I guess a few things he wants to leave behind. So yeah, might have to start hosting parties and working on my ping pong game.
Yeah, great. So viewers and listeners that maybe haven't heard of or had seen the other sessions, you have competed in mixed martial arts, and the last time that we talked, you were discussing a little bit how it's impacted training and kind of, especially now, like tournaments, like the jiu-jitsu tournaments out in California, and some other things. How's the training going? What's the sentiment in with
Really was grappling right now. I was having a conversation yesterday about how it's going to be real strange to get in a room full of people and be grabbing each other and sweating on each other again. And I'm excited for that, but I'm also terrified.
Sure. It's a little bit
life's just so strange. I know someone else reached out to me and asked me, how do you feel about kind of secretly doing some training? And like, well, it depends. Are you getting together with a group of people? I know some people that are doing that. They're getting together, secret undisclosed locations and all of that. And I was like, I get it. I don't think it's right, but I don't think it's that wrong either. It's I understand it from all the perspectives, but yeah, this whole process and thinking about how getting back to normal is going to be has really made me evaluate what I want and need. And I mean, I'm hoping that, there'll be tournaments again by summer, fall, but who knows?
And the UFC is suggesting that they're going to have a big event here in it's a couple of weeks now away. It's in May. Significant event. Yeah. So Gaethje and Tony.
And it's interesting. Normally I'm very like I'm keeping up with, oh, this card's coming up and reading about it and this and that. I haven't been as enthused to keep up with what's going on. I think the whole trying to make April 18th thing kind of turns me off because I thought it was a bad idea.
Yeah.
But now I don't know, I've grown so indifferent just because there are so many bigger things looming, the people's health and the global economy and all of this stuff. Everything else seems kind of insignificant by comparison.
Prioritizing information. So before we had jumped into this, we were doing what we do, is catch up a little bit. And I was sharing a little bit about this app, like stuff with crime reports in the area and how weird it is to suddenly be like, oh, somebody just got shot six blocks from my house, literally. And we were talking about information overload and this idea of like how much information is out there, how there's algorithms now in these social platforms that are aggregating information that they're tailor making for you. Essentially, it's, oh, you like this stuff, we're going to give you more of that stuff. And you kind of shared some thoughts on that. Would you mind in terms of just information overload and data and consumption? And it sounds like what you had just said, though, with seeing the relevance of stuff that's happening in your own world and globally, that certain things are beginning to have more weight to them, maybe more so.
For me, I kind of break it down. My immediate reaction upon seeing a certain headline or something come across my feed in any given way is, okay, well, what does this really mean? Or what does it mean to me? Or what does it mean to the big picture? Some form of the what does it mean, period. For example, there was an article going around very recently, and a lot of people have been talking about it. I believe it was Hormel Foods. No, Tyson. I think it was Tyson. I think it was one of their executives or CEOs or something said that the food chain is breaking. And I kind of skimmed the article and I looked at it and people are talking about the food chain breaking. And I said, in my head, I think what it means is that this company is very much suffering and having to resort to these unprecedented tactics to deal with what they've got going on. But is the food chain breaking? I feel like that's a step too far. And I get where people would be coming from. And in so many ways, it's essential to places that are kind of fresh food deserts and need things like the frozen foods and meats and stuff to come in and fill those shelves of bodegas, not even real shops. It's unfortunate that that's the way it is, but maybe things like this will catalyze change. Maybe, our local growers and farmers will be more empowered in their small communities. Maybe that's how it would go. But unfortunately, I think by saying, oh, Tyson's breaking down, therefore the whole food chain's breaking down, is a little excessive and irresponsible, but people are blowing that up. They think that's a really big point to make with this whole economy thing. And it's too much. It's too...
The deductive reasoning, is it considered? I think that's deductive reasoning, right? You're taking kind of this thought or this idea and then you're breaking it down into smaller parts. The Tyson thing is interesting though. So there's a place in Minnesota, the Smithfield plant in North Dakota. It sounds like there was just 3 meat production facilities that were closed, and it sounded like 15% of the meat produced in the US. Now, if that's true, that's kind of a novel concept, but at the same time, the US is like one of the biggest consumers of meat in the world. So maybe, like you're saying, and it's something that I've tried to start facilitating myself, is the food that is more readily available. Maybe it might not always, you might not be able to have your 1 pound burger with every meal. Not that I have 1 pound burgers for every meal, but yeah, I like a shift in society in terms of just consumption, maybe. Because of the way the supply chains are. It's a lot of just-in-time supply chains, and that's globally as well as domestically. historically, there's businesses that have gone out of business entirely because of it. Fukushima, when Fukushima happened, there was a cellular provider, and can't recall offhand, it was a project that I worked on in school, but this cellular provider, there was a chip inside of their phone. When Fukushima happened, there was fallout, and there was these manufacturing plants that were unable to provide this thing. And the problem was that pre-disaster, they hadn't actually had redundancy in their supply chain. Remove one piece of it and the whole thing falls apart, and there it goes to business. So I'm hoping through COVID, maybe there becomes more of a redundancy and resilience in supply chains, so that this just-in-time supply chain, maybe people start taking a little better look at it. It's a little unfortunate. I just seen one of the pork processing plant. They had the biggest pile of dead animals I've ever seen, and it was waste, right? They did a cost assessment, is my understanding. So they assessed how much money it would take to keep feeding these pigs until they were able to process them. And because the return on investment started going negative, they just said, you know what, we're going to kill all of them, and it's a loss.
Oh.
Yeah. So there was, it was pretty gnarly seeing. I mean, it's just a pile of animals that you're like, man, that's a lot of life that's lost for nothing.
I wonder how much it would cost and how much it would stimulate, like, I don't know, airlines and oil companies to fly those pig carcasses over to Australia where they had all the wildfires in the fall and bury them underneath that and then just see what flourishes. I just went down a rabbit hole.
I like the train of thought. I like trying to figure out how to utilize resources.
I found my new favorite YouTube thing yesterday. I went down a rabbit hole watching this guy do different gardening and composting things in his backyard and
Nice.
how to, make a sustainable life. I'm like, he buried a rooster under his banana tree just to give him more nutrients. That's amazing.
I've heard eggshells, if you clean them out and then you crush them up, it's a lot of nitrogen in the soil.
Done that.
Yeah. Right on. Very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of the people that I talk with regularly, Mark Swarkeo, is out in Siargao, Philippines, working on, he's from the States, but he's got citizenship in the Philippines as well, I believe, dual citizenship, but working on a organic farming initiative, amongst other things. And there's a lot of community-based initiatives that are going on because the industry there, as well as a variety of places, are so dominated by tourism that as soon as the tourism is gone, the money dries up. And as soon as the money dries up, it's like, well, there might be food, but how are you going to buy the food? So now it's shifting to, all right, start growing crops, right? Like you got a river over there you can go fishing. You got your crops that you can grow, and it's interesting hearing them talk about how they've been developing that in the community for a lot of the folks out there. So are you going to have a garden at your new house?
Yeah, I've been starting to plan. I was like, oh, well, I've got trees that are going to drop leaves every year. So over here, I can do my,
compost
mulching. And over here, I ordered my, it's called a sub pod. So it's this box. I think it'll fit in one of the garden beds that's already there. But you leave about 11 centimeters of it exposed. And then I think about a foot of it is underground. And it's got all these holes for aeration. Then it's got these two pockets where you can put your waste in there, and then it's buried in with this soil. So then, and yeah.
We broke up there briefly. So you've got a pod, you can put stuff in it, it's buried. So are you starting seedlings in this thing, or what is the pod for? Well,
I've already got, the pod is just basically a composting bin, but the fact that it's buried under, it's buried in your garden bed essentially. So then it kind of composts itself. You let the worms and the microbes do the work. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. So you're going to have a worm farm. You're going to be composting.
Yeah.
Nice.
I don't know. In a few years, I might just be like ready for whatever comes, some sort of nuclear fallout or whatever. My own self-sustained place.
Your biodome. You're going to have a biodome out in the boonies. Wouldn't that be super rad though?
Yep.
Oh man. So I'm kind of curious. I want to jump back briefly, and I know we're kind of hitting that time, but so we're talking about information and kind of like how you're reading into the information and um, kind of how you process it yourself. You work in public affairs. Your job is to distribute information. How do you, is there a type of a process where you take certain content, or you take an idea and you say, okay, this is what we're going to distribute. How do we make sure that you share something that's relevant and maybe not, I guess I'm not sure the exact term that I'm looking for, but to just share information that is informative and yet not polarized in some sense.
Yeah. So, we're a neutral entity. We're here to help. We're from the government and we're here to help. And
some people might have something to say about that, but
I know they sure would. But that's the thing, is like, that's one of the interesting things about being in the National Guard is, yeah, you are with the government and you're here to help, but maybe that's only 20% of your whole life. And the rest of the time you're just a citizen living your day like anybody else,
right.
So that's where it's very interesting to see and perceive and produce information with these different lenses. And I think one of the things that is interesting is that, you can see information that one outlet produces and publishes, and you can see the way your friends perceive it. And then it's another thing to, be part of an organization that has themes and messages that it wants to get out, information that it wants to share, but also some information that you're not ready to share, or, and things like that. And some would say, oh, well, that's terrible. We want all of the information. You have to be completely transparent with us.
Right.
And I mean, yes and no. If you're running your business, do you want everyone out there to know the ins and outs of your books and this and that and
right.
whatever the case may be? I mean, it's not, trade secrets are a real thing,
Yeah.
But for the most part, us as a public affairs organization, we operate like any other news organization, but maybe with a little bit more integrity. We have a lot of standards we have to uphold, and all we can do is hope that our communities believe and trust us, because that's just we're just out there living it with you guys. So
yeah, I've had a conversation with a couple of friends that this idea of and if I go too far into something, let me know to stop, but I kind of like this this thought experiment, if you will. So COVID is uncertain at best. The information that comes out, a couple of weeks later, there might be opposing information from some of the same people, right? And it's before we had started recording this, we were talking a bit about, I mentioned that Rumsfeld quote about the known knowns, the known unknowns, and then the unknown unknowns, just the stuff that you couldn't even have ever imagined, comes to light. And then suddenly that would change a paradigm, that's based off this old information. But kind of this idea of martial law, right? So military, government, in the States, this last weekend, there was this protest a block and a half from my house again at the governor's mansion. A lot of Second Amendment rights folks with, armed, regardless which side of that aisle you're on. This idea of like martial law and holding people against their will in their communities. And the idea is that I keep going back to is, well, a large port, like the National Guard is brothers, sisters, dads, moms, kids. And I question, like, so the U.S. Army is kind of its own thing. There's the National Guards and the reserves, state and local. If it came down, and this is just a question, but if an order came down through a unit suggesting, what, things are out of control, these civilians aren't listening, we're going to deploy our units throughout the city, arm them, and they are going to hold these people aren't allowed to leave their houses anymore, or like whatever the extent of the martial law is, who knows, we'll just say it's people armed on your street corner, right? Which is this draconian visual.
Mhm.
But the question that I keep going back to is how long would something like that last for, when the population of this Guard, Reserve, Army, they have mom, dad, brother, sister, kids, like, that are right there, right?
Yeah. You
So
know, it's interesting because I've thought about this myself. Like, if there was any sort of uprising and it became, citizens against the military, unfortunately, that's the world where we have to entertain that thought sometimes. Like, how would this happen? But I think I'm at a place where I can really just slough that off, because any of our governors, at least, Minnesota, California, New York, so many, they're not going to implement that. And if the federal government tried to implement that, it would be a moot point. They wouldn't be able to enforce it without, trying to federalize the National Guard and in each individual state to make that work, because you're not going to send all your active duty Army personnel across the state.
there's
It's
not
just
enough.
yeah, it's just a weird thing to consider. And when people complain about, the government locking us in our homes and this and that, it's no, we didn't weld doors shut and keep people in and have armed guards on block, corner block squares or things like that. I don't know, people get real emotional about it, but you still have a lot more freedoms than you think you do. I understand if your job got taken away, I apologize for that, but I mean, I don't know.
It's
You
one of
get all
those,
mad. I don't know.
it's the friction. That's why I wanted to bring it up, because I love this. It's a thought experiment, right? It's pose the
Yeah.
question, kind of think about it. To your point, what you had mentioned with federal and state, though, for any viewers, listeners outside of the U.S., there is this federal government, and then there's the states, and state law and legislature. It was really right down that alley with New York and some of the East Coast states, that when the federal government started saying something about extending lockdowns or doing something more of restrictions, they started the state pacts rather, where there was a number of different states that just said, listen, if you're going to come at us, they built an alliance essentially saying, you can't do this. Like, you can't come in and do that to us. We're going to manage our own people. So yeah, I like that. And
To
then
your
it's,
to
go
your
ahead.
point, they did that because they felt, and the guidelines that they were instituting were for the protection of the citizens. And one thing that I think did happen, especially in those states that we had mentioned before, is, they talked about, there was a term kind of federalizing troops from the National Guards of those states. Well, what happened with that state and most states is they were activated and they were paid through federal dollars, but they still answered to their governor as commander-in-chief. So the orders that came down were still from a more local source, and they were still for their own community. They weren't, federalized at a level that, oh, well, big government's coming to, start making the troops tell me how to live my life. That's not what happened.
Right. And case in point, it's just it's the information that we're only as good as the information we have, and that's what I hope a lot of people that buy into this channel, the information, the ideas that a lot of the folks are discussing is, everybody's an individual. Everybody has their own world, their own life that's happening, their own diary, if you will, and that's going to be largely developed based on the information they consume and how they process that, scientific reasoning or deductive reasoning, or some type of process. And hopefully through all this, like you were talking with the supply chains and a cultural sort of awakening, and maybe how resources are being utilized, I think regardless of what happens in the next year to 2 years, I think it would be safe to say that at the end of all of this, there will have been some sort of a cultural awakening in terms of resources, in terms of societal norms and how we are as a culture and a society. So it'll be interesting to see how that all works out. And by then your house will have hopefully appreciated in value, and your veggies will be coming in. Great. Yeah, I really like this. I love going down rabbit holes and having these types of conversations. I really appreciate it, Linsey. Was there anything that you were hoping to share before we go, or did we kind of just...
No, I hope you're right about seeing some sort of cultural shift in society. Yeah, it'll be a fun journey.
I just hope people start learning to ask the right questions, and the more people are open to listening and even trying to digest opposing views, even if they're not specific to their own, because that's the only way you can really generate a really solid understanding of any debate or topic, is to know all the sides of it. So great. I appreciate it, Linsey. Thank you as always. I look forward to hearing what happens with the home buying. Hopefully next time we talk, you're going to be well on your way to closing, and things will be looking up. So thanks again to the viewers and listeners. You can check out the information below. Linsey shared a bunch of information on the Minnesota National Guard and other resources you can check out. And until next time, stay safe out there and stick around. We'll got more information coming your way later.
Yeah, thanks. Bye.